The topic that we're going to be discussing this afternoon is that human existence doesn't matter, which is a fairly challenging proposition, and in the course of our conversation we'll also try to unpack what it is in any case, this thing called human existence. I should mention before we get underway that we haven't had a long period of preparation where we've got really cleverly crafted answers. All four of us are philosophers, all four of us are prepared here to think out loud. We're from different disciplines with different experience, so we'll be seeing how we go in the course of this, challenging ideas, testing ways of thinking in public about such a question, and also hopefully when we get within about 20 minutes of the closure to be able to draw you in to add to our conversation, either perhaps with a question, or you may even have a really profound insight of your own that you want to offer as part of the conversation. Joining me here on the couch is, first of all, and I'll go in the order in which we're sitting, Rebecca Neuberger Goldstein, who received her doctorate in philosophy from Princeton University in the United States. She's written a number of award-winning books, including novels, which on the mind-body problem, 36 Arguments for the Existence of God, and it's got a very important subtitle, A Work of Fiction. She's great on, Rebecca's very good on subtitles, because her next one is Plato at the Googleplex, Why Philosophy Won't Go Away. Would you please welcome Rebecca? Then Francesca Minerva. Francesca's joining us at FODI for the second occasion. She gave, with Alberto, a wonderful talk a couple of years ago, I think it is now, Francesca,
2012,
on the topic that a fetus is not a person. Which was a very dangerous idea, as it turned out. She's a philosopher, a medical and bioethicist, and there is a difference there. She's currently the Deputy Director of the Centre for Applied Philosophy and Public Ethics, this part of it based at the University of Melbourne, originally from Italy, and is currently based in Melbourne, but looking to travel back to Europe, I think, in the next year or so to resume a career over there. Please welcome Francesca.
Thank you.
And finally, Hugh Price, who has the best title out of all of us, because he's the Bertrand Russell Professor of Philosophy at Cambridge University. And he co-founded, and we'll be hearing more about this during the course of the festival, the Centre for the Study of Existential Risk. And Hugh is a philosopher who was a professor here in Sydney for many years and worked in fantastically interesting areas, including the philosophy of time and a number of different areas. So would you please join me in welcoming Hugh? Okay, who wants to have a crack at how we might start with this notion of why human existence might or might matter? I mean, actually, I'll start with you, Hugh, rather than asking for volunteers. I mean, you take a topic like that, how do we begin even to break it down? If you were just given this to say, okay, here's a problem which you're going to have to start thinking about with a fresh sheet, so to speak, where would you want to begin?
Well, Simon, I think given the way it's been framed, I think thinking about the question, matter to whom, might be a good way to go. Because we might want to say that there's a very big difference between the question as to whether human existence matters to us, that is, to humans, and the question as to whether it matters from any other point of view. Indeed, whether there is any other point of view from which you can sensibly ask the question.
Right. Would anybody else want to start in a different way? If you had just presented this fresh, you're sitting there in the quiet moment, trying to think about this, would you start differently? Rebecca?
Well, actually, I've thought a great deal about this issue of mattering. I mean, it seems to me that it lies very much at the heart of human nature that we want to matter. I think that there is, in fact, a will to matter, and that as soon as the basic needs of survival are satisfied, this will to matter sort of burgeons forth, and I think it, in fact, is the source of all of the normative systems, the religious systems that have survived, that emerged during the Axial Age between roughly 800 and 200 BCE, and our discipline, philosophy, that emerged at the same time. That this doesn't take very much reflection to think, all these people came before us and they cared about their lives, and they strived, and they longed, and they loved, and they fought, and they won, and they lost. And they left not a trace behind them. There's nothing at all behind them. Why shouldn't we assume that the very same thing is going to happen to us? Why did we even bother to show up for our existence at all? I mean, it's as if we had a choice. But so that there is this, it is, I think, the existential question. We want to matter. Do we matter to the universe? Well, in some normative systems, yes, we do. My normative system, no, we don't. But I do think it's a very, very deep question, this will to matter, and how we conceive of our lives in order to build some sense of mattering out of them.
Okay, well, we'll come back to this because a couple of other topics at the festival have been about narcissism, and some of it's, it's been talked about as an epidemic in the modern world. And that could be explained in part by this will to matter as one expression of it. How would you begin, Francesca?
I will introduce another element, which is, why do we matter? And I would think that one answer is we matter because we can experience things and we can do things, and especially we can experience happiness. And the other question related to this is, do we matter more than other sentient beings? And that's an interesting question because animals can feel pleasure and be unhappy as well. So I would introduce these other elements in all concerns about, extinctions or possible risks to our survival on Earth.
Now, Rebecca had a go at trying to frame a particular answer to Hugh's first question, which is matter to whom? And he said there's a range of possibilities here. Rebecca said, well, at least mattering to us in the sense that we have this will to matter. So it's self-referential in that sense. You've included other things that might matter. Are you happy to stop with Rebecca's view that this is about mattering to other human beings? Or do you want to extend who it is that we might matter to?
I'm not entirely sure that we matter to other human beings for somehow intrinsic reasons. So
you don't think we would matter for intrinsic reasons?
Yeah, no, I would think that we matter because we can experience happiness, and on this level then animals and other sentient beings come into the scene. But of course, human beings have higher capacities and can experience things on a higher level and a wider range of emotions. So I can agree that there is a special stress on human existence.
I mean, we in some sense, we're the ones who want to matter. We're the ones who even think about this question and agonize about this question. So although you could, here, I'll go out on a limb and say that because we care about this question, and then we come up with various systems in order to somehow satisfy this will to matter, that we matter more. This is already points to a higher degree of complexity, of conceptualization, of normative thinking, of justification, right? We're considering the question that we don't matter, and we're trying to justify to ourselves whether we matter, that all of this higher level of conceptualization makes us matter more.
Okay, so there's a qualitative aspect to human existence, whether or not it's evenly distributed across all humanity or not, but we'll attach it to being human, which you're arguing is marked by this capacity to have this kind of reflective conversation about our own existence, about whether it matters, even to make the kinds of points that Francesca was making about other sentient beings, and that this is at least distinctive of human existence. If not unique, it's distinctive. And therefore, that's one reason why we might matter more than the sentient being. Hugh?
I think this notion of the reflective standpoint is an important one here, and I think it marks a difference between the way in which Rebecca is understanding the question about mattering and the way in which I was understanding it at the beginning. I mean, I think what Rebecca has in mind, tell me if I'm wrong, Rebecca, is that it's a sort of standpoint we have as philosophers, and we step back from ordinary kind of day-to-day considerations and think, does any of this matter? Big question, capital M. I was taking it in a much more ordinary sense, the sense we have when we think about some particular choice. Is there anything to be said in favour of that rather than that? So does the choice between humans continuing to exist, humans not continuing to exist, does that matter? And thinking of that as just an ordinary sort of down-to-earth choice in the way in which you see a child run into the road. Does the fate of that child matter? Now, what you're thinking about there is it's not the reflective standpoint. It's the question as to what's involved in the choice that you make down at the first order level, as philosophers say. When you have a practical choice.
So I have two responses to that. One is, I don't think it's just philosophers who think about does human life matter. I think that this is almost universal. And that is if a certain preconditions are set in place, you have enough to eat, you have a home over your head. And I think it's not... I don't think you have to have a PhD in philosophy, and I do believe that this was the source of the axial age. It was questions about mattering, and then coming up with the super de-duper mattering guarantee. God, right? We matter to God, right? And everything we do matters to God, and that is so. In any case, I would say that this does not belong to philosophers.
It's kind of how you guarantee that you matter, by mattering to God.
Absolutely. And the way this really was impressed on me is when I came out as an atheist, right? Yeah. And I got lots and lots of letters emails from people saying, what gets you up in the morning? Why do you want to get out of bed? And this was never a question that occurred to me. I mean, I have so much to do. And I struggled where is this coming from? And I thought about it, and I think, it's people who think, if you don't have that great guarantee that you matter, cosmically matter, what gets you up out of bed? That this was some sort of, and it was very interesting.
Did they ask you about why animals get out of bed? I mean, did they? Seriously, was there a sense that, well, there might be a problem here that sentient beings like animals, they are presumably in the creation story are all emanate from this divine being. So is it because they matter to God too that they're getting out of bed, or?
Yeah, maybe because they don't have to decide whether, we have to deliberate. And I mean, that's the other part of the question that you were asking. But we have decisions, we make decisions. And among the things that we think about is, what is it that matters? I can make this choice. I can become a philosopher. I could become a doctor. I can do, what is going to matter more? I can become a mother or a parent or not. What will matter? And it's these kinds of decisions. But in some sense, it's all referring to mattering, I think. I think you're right there, that it's all referring to mattering. But at a higher level, there's this stepping away, and which I don't think just belongs to philosophers, of saying, does any of it matter? That sense of absurdity that comes over you as you're going about your life, doing this, that, and the other, and then that step away, and it's like,
aren't we ridiculous creatures?
Yes, yes.
Yeah. Francesca?
And I'm thinking that I'm feeling very superficial and shallow because I usually don't question myself about, do I matter or do other people matter? But I usually try to assess whether I am happy and are other people happy. And somehow it is related because to me, the meaning and the goal of life is to be happy, to make the most of this limited time we have on Earth, and to make sure that other sentient beings around me, humans and non-humans, are happy.
Can you just on this notion of happiness, because it comes up in philosophy all the time, and there are various translations of the word eudaimonia, which is usually what, at least in the Western tradition, people are casting back to that concept, which these days is translated in a way that doesn't use the word happiness in English, but instead the word flourishing. Yeah. You're using the word happy can you explain what you mean by this sense of happiness? Is it the sense of flourishing, or is it something more like just a general sense of feeling good about yourself in the world?
I think it implies both. So you have some basic level of happiness, like I have an ice cream and I am happy because, but also like being able to have plans for my future and to achieve these goals. So it's more of a long-term happiness, and perhaps in the way like that brings me to achieve those goals, I suffer a bit, but I have a goal ahead of me, and so that goals eventually will give me happiness. So I think there are like immediate and non-immediate happiness, but overall I think it's a very psychological feeling. Like I feel happy, and my level of well-being is reasonably high, and I take pleasure from the things I do and the surroundings.
There must be a difference between being Italian and being Jewish, but
somebody once gave me an Italian Jewish cookbook. I couldn't believe it.
Yeah, I don't know. I would say happiness is greatly overrated.
I guess it comes from being a hedonistic utilitarian, maybe more than being Italian, but maybe that, they are related. Yeah, I never really thought if being Italian has an influence on that, but perhaps it does.
Perhaps it does.
Now, while we reflect on that particular difference, some people listening to this conversation in another time might think, it's all very well, philosophers sitting there, and they could be arguing about how many angels will fit on the head of a pin and things. But this question about human existence and whether or not it matters has a new kind of practical urgency, I think. And Hugh, I introduced you as one of the founders of the Centre for the Study of Existential Risk. And I wonder if you could unpack why you and Martin Rees and Jan Tallinn have actually created this centre, because this isn't just for idle speculation. It's not kind of the pinhead conversation, is it? It's a bit more practically oriented.
No, I mean, it's intended to do something practical and something that we think is very important. And the basic thought is, well, first step, we're familiar with things that might threaten the existence of the species as a whole, such as asteroids or mega volcanoes, that kind of thing. We're also familiar with the fact that we ourselves might threaten our own existence, as we've done for more than half a century with nuclear weapons. We've been very lucky to get away with it so far. In somewhat longer term, perhaps from extreme effects of climate change. But there's a particular class of human-produced risks which we feel is getting almost none of the attention it deserves at the moment. And those are risks arising as unintended byproducts of some remarkable and in many ways very beneficial new technologies, such as synthetic biology or artificial intelligence. Possibly some people think the same is true of nanotechnology. Now, what's characteristic of those cases, roughly speaking, is that they have the capacity to put a tremendous amount of power, including power which could be used to effectively to finish off all of us or many of us, into a smaller and smaller number of hands. I mean, for example, by something like the creation of a sort of artificial bacterium, a bacterium with purpose-built DNA for some purpose, which might be to kill as many humans as possible. Imagine somebody who thinks that they're taking a cosmic perspective and that the planet would be better off without humans.
Well, a group of CSIRO scientists a few years ago developed a mouse box which was within, if anybody weaponized it, that'd be it.
Yeah, well, so this is an example. And the worry is that these sorts of things are going to become easier and easier to do. One of the people involved in the project with us in Cambridge, there's a distinguished professor in zoology there, said that what frightened him was the thought that in 10 years' time, you'll have an app on your phone which will enable you to design a bacterium, email the code off to a laboratory, and a vial will come back with your purpose-built bacterium in it. So the general thought is that we've got to a stage in our technological development where we have to start thinking about this new class of risks risks which arise as unintended byproducts of things which are very good things to develop for other reasons. There's lots of good that we can do with these technologies. And some of these concerns have been thought of as a little bit flaky. It's been difficult for people working within the fields to express concerns. They're at risk of getting regarded as not being team players, that kind of thing. You know how these disciplines work. So one of the things we want to do is to create in effect, a community of scientists and others like philosophers, some of them very distinguished people, who will come together and say, no, we think these things need to be worked on, and to establish a centre where this can be done and have links with similar centres elsewhere. And so that's the project of our centre in Cambridge, to try and focus a lot more attention on this particular class of risks, the ones arising from new technologies.
Now, presumably when you've been doing this, you, Martin and Jan, thought this is something worth cooperating on. You've put in funding applications, you've attracted people to this process. And they will have asked, no doubt, well, why does it matter? Okay, we can understand that there might be nano goo that plasters the earth, or self-replication of robots with autonomous artificial intelligence, and they might come after us, but so what?
My view, Simon, is that really it's just like the case I mentioned at the beginning. You see the child run into the road. Do you sit there and think, does that child matter from the universe's point of view, or do you try and save the child? Of course, you try and save the child. And this is exactly that kind of decision. It's not an immediate one, because the consequences we're talking about might be 20, 50, 100 years ahead. But it's exactly that same kind of first-order simple choice.
So obvious that it doesn't require further explanation?
It's so obvious that from our point of view, it doesn't require further justification. It's just as obvious that we should be doing it as it is in the case of the child running into the road. Now, of course, you can come along as a philosopher and say, well, it matters from our point of view. I understand why you're doing this. You're human, and any reasonable human would do the same thing. But does it matter from any other point of view? Does it matter from the universe's point of view?
The universe doesn't have a point of view.
Exactly, that's what I say.
Yes.
I say that's as sensible as the question,
yes.
Does it matter from the table's point of view? And the answer is,
yes.
But
there are people,
but
there are other people, and there's a guy I've always thought would be good to get here for the festival. And I think his name, I've probably got the second base, Linky Pentacola, I think, or something of that kind. Anyway, he believes, and others who of his mind think, that it would be a positively good thing if human beings weren't on this planet. That the planet...
I find it very difficult to understand that. It's a good thing
from
what?
From what
point of
well,
view?
this group, and I'm not a competent person to argue their case, but as I've engaged with it, they seem to think that there is a value in all other forms of nature which seem, in their view, to face grave loss, extinction in some cases, because of the activities of human beings, and that human beings will continue to be wanton in their conduct, climate change, a whole lot of things. Therefore, remove the problem and let the planet get on with itself. I mean, it's almost some of the Gaia thesis is eventually there'll be Mother Nature pays back and we're gone and they get on. That's the sort of argument they make.
I find this absolutely obscene, actually, this point of view. You could argue, for example, I mean, here I just don't even understand it, because it's for the good of something that doesn't have a point of view.
It can't articulate it.
I mean, was this planet better off during the Ice Age or when the dinosaurs were here? I mean, ask the planet. Let's see what kind of answer you get from it. Or if to just say, to wipe out, look, I think it's pretty clear that, wiping out one child's death is a tragedy. Multiply that, it's tragic. If anything is tragic, that's tragic. And even if it benefits those for whom there could be benefit, it's still, it's obscene, it's immoral, it's tragic. So it could have been...
But to whom? It's to us. Mean, it's presumably to us, because if the universe has no point of view, if these other creatures are incapable of expressing a view about whether it's a good thing we're here or not, the only being for which this could be obscene is presumably other human beings like us.
Yes, it's a tragedy for us. All of this takes place within the context of
us.
The universe doesn't care. Nothing, and other creatures don't care. It's for us. But if tragedy means anything, if our great literature means anything, if we're able to respond to any of this, and these are contexts of meaning that we create for ourselves, doesn't objectively exist out there in the universe, but there it is, then, wiping out this. Here's another thing. Here's another reason why perhaps, it would be a tragedy, maybe even for the universe. We're the part of the universe that understands the universe, or who understands a bit of the universe. That's a very interesting thing about our species. I'm proud of our species, right? I was in Uganda over January. I was watching our nearest relatives, the chimps, and there's so many ways in which we're so similar to them. In fact, I got a completely new insight into the difference between the genders by watching the male and the female chimps. But so much of our behavior is replicated by the chimps. But I just kept thinking, by golly, we've come so far, right? This is really amazing. Here we are having this kind of conversation, or, I go to a concert and here we are, we created these, masterpieces, and they are it's only for us that they're masterpieces, but they are. That is a very cool thing in the universe. It's this part of the universe.
I want to come back to the argument, because I came to a similar position in a conversation I had with Bill Joy, who's one of the founders of Sun Microsystems, and he wrote quite a few years ago now, something which prefigured your own work, Hugh, in an article in Wired magazine where he looked at self-replication and applied that to robotics, nanotechnology and biotechnology, and saw this as an existential threat, and said, well, let's start talking about it, this point of view. And then I had to discuss, well, why does it matter? But it's very much in that space. But Francesca, I sense you wanted to jump in when Francesca was talking about it.
Yes, no, I was wondering if then you would agree that if the extinction of the human species would occur because a better species comes in, and either because we evolve in a way that, a new species come up, or because aliens take over Earth, and then they can experience much more happiness, they are much smarter, they can do things we cannot even think of. Would in that sense be a good thing, like the extinction of human species? Because in that case you say, yes, well, humans are not here anymore, but look, we have something much better. Would you think that would be a bad thing or a good thing? I think it would be a good thing. That would be a good case for human extinction, but I'm not sure.
Would you be lining up for, say, here I am, I'm happy, but...
Well, no, but because I am living now and, I have projects for myself, but if they told me, okay, Francesca, you can have children because some better species will, I would say, okay, well, fine. That's fine by me. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Well, there might be another possibility, which is that there's plenty of room for the humans and for the other species, which brings me back to something I wanted to say, sort of following on from Rebecca's comments. I think one thing which had got a little bit lost in the discussion earlier was that to say that the universe has a viewpoint is certainly not to say that we're the only creatures who have a viewpoint or have interests. And the chimps certainly have interests. To what extent you could call it a viewpoint, I think, is questionable. But I think there's a very strong case for thinking that we should, at least in some respects, we should treat chimps and other apes as persons, as creatures with sort of moral rights of some kind. So I didn't mean to be implying a sort of human-centric view of the moral community. I just meant that if you try to go to the other extreme and think of the universe having a point of view, that's as ridiculous as thinking of a rock as having a point of view.
It's very well.
I agree with you entirely. Yeah, agree with you entirely. And we could say that there's a kind of hierarchy, a kind of gradation, and every sentient creature has every creature that can suffer. Suffering is bad. You know,
exactly.
and suffering is just bad,
And we might-
whoever it has. So whatever sentient creature suffers should not suffer. A normative statement there, ought not to suffer. But then, you know, perhaps I'm going out on a creature who has self-awareness, so who passes the what is that test
Mirror
they
test?
get?
The mirror?
The mirror test, you know, with the spot on it, and you know, tries to rub it off, and has some notion of a higher notion, and perhaps capable of more emotions. Being aware of itself as a self has more complicated emotions. Perhaps at the next level, creatures like us, and maybe chimps even, maybe even elephants, who have a narrative, you know, have a sense of themselves continuing over time and can form plans, and capable of mourning, you know, those who have left its life. You know, and I can imagine a next higher level as well, but I don't think having a higher level wipes out the other ones.
Exactly.
No, but there is this old idea, and it's just one concept worth unpacking a bit, just because we may have used it in a way which not everybody understands the distinction that was being made. In this ladder of being, if you like, that you know, kind of got ant being and frog being and then human being somewhere on this spectrum. You referred to this concept of, well, perhaps chimps should be considered as persons. Now, one of the things that people don't always understand when they hear philosophers talking about this is that that notion of personhood as a moral category is different to the biological category
Exactly.
of
Yes.
human being or chimpanzee or something of that
Yes.
kind.
Yes.
And Peter Singer, another Australian philosopher, has argued that not all persons are human beings, so that it should be extended to include chimps and, you suggested, elephants and other creatures that
Yes.
might have narratives, but also that not all human beings are persons, that there are certain attributes in which, or states in which human beings are no longer able to be held within that moral category because of incapacity or whatever. It's been a very controversial argument. You've touched the edges, or not just the edges of this, in some of yours and Alberto's work as well, Francesca. But this notion of there being a ladder which there are differences, but that it doesn't wipe out the interests or concerns or even perhaps the rights of other things, do we all agree with that? There's something like that at work, or do you want to have a kind of a flatter structure? Francesca, perhaps?
Well, I think that the things that matters the most is the capacity to suffer. So we have to make sure that no creature which is actually able to perceive pain and to suffer is not inflicted suffering. And that, to me, is the most important thing. And then, yes, of course, I agree that, you know, as you have capacity to have projects and plans and to have higher brain functions, then it probably matters more to you to keep living. Yes.
You have more opportunities to suffer.
But also to be happy, hopefully.
It's Italy, stereotypes. When I was talking about this with that conversation with Bill Joy, the thing that occurred to me that may not be unique, but again is distinctive of human beings, and this comes back to your point, Rebecca, is that we have this evident capacity to transcend instinct and desire and to make conscious ethical choices. I mean, a lion on a veldt might see an impala, stalk it. I rather doubt that it stops and says, oh gosh, I'm hungry, but what about its children? You know, I think they're inclined to go and catch it and kill it and eat it. Although there are some interesting exceptions that you hear about. Whereas human beings, without anybody ever observing them, without ever having a restraining hand in place, can feel every instinct or desire to do something but not do it, purely because they've said, well, that's wrong to do, or they will do something like stay firm in the face of terribly fearful moments and show that courage when instinct and desire would send you to run away. Yeah. And I wonder in this conversation whether or not a universe that has produced that kind of consciousness with that kind of capacity, that there is something special about it, that it would be somewhat tragic if it just got snuffed out, unless it was replaced, at least in your thought experiment, Francesca, by a kind of being which was not just better in the sense that it had a few extra arms or it was smarter, but it would have to have that sensibility too, otherwise there would be a tragic loss.
I mean, I would go even further than that, and I actually believe that we've made moral progress.
I agree.
Yeah, and that I'm very proud of our species for that, but also I'm proud of our chosen profession, philosophy, because I think philosophy has contributed to, this rigorous analysis of justification and examining grounds has contributed, actually, to individual rights movements and spread of moral progress. I mean, when we can look back at what our ancestors did, our, slave-owning, wife-beating, xenophobic ancestors, and say, we've come a long way. And that, to me, is something very, very interesting, that it's not just in science that we've increased and made progress, but in our moral capacity as well, that we've been able to reason our way into what Peter Singer calls, your great Australian philosopher, now at Princeton, the...
man of impeccable taste.
Yes. The widening circle of empathy, but we've reasoned our way into that. And that is, I would be sad to see creatures who have accomplished that go.
Do you think we can talk about belonging to a certain class of being then? So all humans, irrespective of their particular attributes, have a certain kind of significance because they are human, just because they belong to that class, that can produce the Brahms that's being played, I think, at the moment somewhere in the concert hall, all the interesting things which you are proud of for our particular species? Or do you think we should be looking at a more individual assessment of each person in terms of their capacity? Francesca?
No, as I was saying earlier, I mean, the capacity to experience pain is, and to have plans for the future and to reach goals and to plan life. That I think belong to every
But what about if
person.
a particular individual cannot experience pain any longer or form goals?
like
Do they still belong to that class, or have they fallen out of it if they, for some reason, have lost that capacity?
Yeah, like somebody is in a vegetative state, or yes, I think that's the category of person wouldn't apply to that individual anymore, and so therefore they would lose their interest in keep living. Yes.
I mean, I would want to, I didn't want to say that because, we've produced masterpieces, some of our species
There's a few other terrible things we produced too. I mean, Hugh
Yeah.
talked about atomic bombs, and we've tortured people, enslaved people, and it's not exactly, and philosophers have played their role in
bad
creating
philosophy, only bad philosophy.
Whatever, it's a bit like electricity then. We played our role in creating systems and ideas which have been totalitarian in their function. Which
But
have been
I actually would not
before
want
we
to...
get too self-satisfied.
Yes, I would not want to say that it's producing anything extraordinary that makes us matter. When I was at the Museum of the Holocaust in Berlin, and my family was decimated by the Holocaust, and I went to see this. It was just when it opened up. And I walked through, well, maybe I was just primed to be enraged, given my family history, but it made it seem as if, oh, what a tragedy, that German Jewry was wiped out because they were Einstein, and they were, Anne Frank, and, and they had the violins and the this and the that. And I was like, no, that's not why it was a tragedy. Most of them were just regular people, and it's still a tragedy, right? We don't have to be extraordinary in order to matter, in order for it to be tragic for us to be wiped out.
Well, your capacity to suffer doesn't depend on your intellect or
exactly,
IQ.
or to want to live and to want your children to live and to prosper. I mean, that's what makes it tragic.
Well, look, let's throw it open. Look, there's possibly people sitting in the room who are thinking, oh yeah, they're all self-satisfied, sitting up there on their couch and things like that. I want to prick the balloon a little bit. Anybody there's microphones either side here. We've got lights which can be brought up to where the microphones are. Just, they're either side there. I know that I can see one slight glimmering. If you'd like to come down, I don't know if we've got... Can we bring up the house lights a little bit so we can see... there you are. The lights are coming up on the microphones, right? And just there, because we've got about 20 minutes to go. So would anybody like to come and join our conversation? You can ask a question about this matter in general or about some specific element. Or, as I say, add your own thoughts about human existence, what it is, why it might matter, including the threats that Hugh was talking about. So, down here, if you just say your name, please, and jump in.
Stephen Menzies. I love Francesca's view because it seems to be the reincarnation of the Epicureans. I mean, we only live for this life and the pleasure we derive. I want to ask a question, though, of Rebecca. If we take the view that our whole species can no longer breed through one of Hugh's existential risks, a biological hazard, at that time when we can't propagate the biological urge to reproduce, what then and how do we matter as a species? What should we be doing? Those of us who then live but know that the species will end.
Good. So we're starting off with an easy one.
I think you've given me the theme for my next novel, so I thank you very much. But, you know, in some sense, you're saying, so if we were the very last and we knew we were the very last, how would we spend our last days? Or
because Epicurus said we should still be happy. We within ourselves, within our reaction of those who are still around us, we have a complete universe. And so that's why I like Francesca's view.
You don't need a future to be happy.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I guess I would feel very bad. I wouldn't be happy. I'd be very sad for this species disappearing from the universe, for this species with its incredible history, its stories, its drama, its tragedies, its triumphs, that whole thing disappearing would seem to me the universe has lost something very big. And I think that you feel that way too, which is why you are studying the existential risk, you know, that there's the loss of this species would be
But
sad.
you'd be okay, wouldn't you? You'd say, it's okay, if that's it, you know?
No, I completely agree with this. Like, my point is that it would be a tragedy because of the loss of future happiness, that, you know, if we don't have human beings or we don't have any species surviving anymore, nobody would experience happiness anymore. And that would be tragic.
But once that was inevitable to you, if you accepted the proposition that this is definite, there is nothing that can be done about it, would you not simply resign yourself to that and say, okay, I feel terrible about that, but I've got to get over it now and be happy for what remains of my days and that of humanity?
Or
would you be weighed down by this terrible thing? I mean, I'm thinking about your will to matter.
Yeah.
I mean, that could also be a kind of pathology that could get in the way of, enjoying what days you have remaining.
I think it would depend very much on your personality, right? I don't think there's a real right answer here, you know. Some of us would mourn, and some of us would go off to the orgies.
Right, that's a tough choice. Let's go over here. Thanks, Stephen.
Hey, you touched on my question slightly when using the ladder analogy for animals and human beings, and also when you touched slightly also on saying chimpanzees should get the same rights as human beings. I was wondering what you think about every animal getting the same rights as human beings, irrelevant of their ability to suffer or feel happiness, but rather that the rights that we have and some animals have, are they innate or are they given to them by us?
Now, just to clarify, are you saying just animals or all life forms? Are you
all life forms in general?
So flies and beetles
yes.
and bacteria?
Yep.
Okay, so and what do you want to know? Could everything that is alive enjoy a fundamental ethical status?
Yes, do they deserve the same rights that we have?
Same rights as us, okay, Hugh.
I would say no. I want to tie it, and I think this was Rebecca's view too, to the fact that some creatures clearly have, for example, the capacity to suffer, and the sort of duty we owe to them depends on that, and so it's inevitably a matter of degree. Now, like many people, like Peter Singer, who's been mentioned a couple of times, I think there's a strong case to be made for giving species the benefit of the doubt to a certain extent, and so drawing the circle rather widely. But I really can't see anything in the ideas that we've talked about in favour of thinking of every individual life form as having some sort of intrinsic right to exist.
Does anybody want to take a different view on that? Otherwise, we'll move along. Does anybody want to say, no, I actually want to make some claims for all life forms, even bacteria and virus and things?
Well, I think that like bacteria and some insects don't actually have the capacity to feel pain. So, and I think there is one basic right that all creatures who can perceive pain are entitled to, and that's the right not to be inflicted pain. But beside that, I don't think that you can extend the same, like the right to vote to,
What about this kind of reverence for life, to exist, that life can be seen as an attribute of all things that, obviously, by definition, are living, which they have a right to maintain without being summarily denied that existence?
Oh, have you ever lived in a roach-infested apartment?
No.
No, I draw
Question
the line.
answered.
Yes.
Right. Down here. Oh, you might have to pop up a bit. Yeah, thank you for that.
Mother Nature wanted me a little bit short.
Yeah.
So here we are. First of all, thank you very much for, sharing with us your ideas. I have a question for all of you around human existence in the context of the digital world. Like you raised, the new class of risk unintended by products of technologies, and the fact that we are surrounded by Facebook, Twitter, Pinterest, Instagram, you name it, all of them. And it looks like we've lost the sense of relating to each other, to matter to each other in a face-to-face environment. In everything, it's getting digitized in 101010. What's the evolution of that? How do you see it? How are we perceiving? Do we matter? Do we matter to ourselves, and do we matter to others in this kind of context, which is a whole revolution? We've never experienced something like that before.
So, Francesca, given what we're saying about why we might matter, is this being eroded by the digital thing? You can tweet this answer, okay?
I don't have Twitter, and I work in the digital world, and I can tell you, I don't even have a smartphone.
Right. Francesca?
I kind of feel optimistic about that. It kind of makes me feel that we are now able to connect to people who are so far away from us, and that we wouldn't meet in any other ways apart from, the web. So, if you have a blog and then you read other people's blog, and you kind of feel part of those lives. And on the other hand, it gives us a bit of immortality. The other day I was thinking, well, when I die, there will be so many pieces of myself around, like things I've written online, that it's kind of, I'm always being there, because all this information, all these thoughts are going to be stuck there. So, I don't know, it kind of makes me feel more hopeful in some sense, but maybe that's because I'm Italian.
Well, I'm Italian too, and I can tell you that some Italians are happy, but lots of them are unhappy. And those who are unhappy are in Australia, because they cannot be happy in Italy.
Thank you very much. Rebecca, are you a digital sort of person who's...
I've been pulled into it a little bit. Not as much as most people in my line of work, that is, writers. So I see it actually very much in terms of, again, the will to matter, that it is spreading yourself out there. And, I don't know how it is here in Australia, but I go to a restaurant in New York or Boston, and everybody's taking pictures of their food. Do they do that here? Right?
Oh, we just have a lot of unhappy Italians.
Put pictures of their food to post.
Yeah, that happens
Instagram
here.
And all of this, and it's a kind of sort of spreading your life out there, showing that you're here and getting attention. I mean, to me, it seems it's in the aim, the goal of trying to matter. It seems, I'll say it, somewhat pathetic to me. I think that there are better ways, of trying to, but I don't want to. I mean, everybody has their own way. I write my books. Other people tweet. Who's to say one is better than the other?
I actually thought the question was going to go somewhat different direction. Talk about kind of a disembodied human consciousness inhabiting the net or something like that. But Hugh,
I think we're a long way from that. I mean, I think one of the things we have to realise here is that we've been talking about human extinction, but human culture is constantly evolving, and so part of that process of evolution is that some bits of it get extinguished, and often that's a good thing. We manage to get rid of something which we come to see as rather nasty. And I think the case of Facebook is just another evolution in our way of interacting with each other, and it has pluses and minuses. I actually rather like it. I actually rather enjoying taking pictures of meals I have when I'm traveling.
It's the world of
especially good coffee, which as everyone here will know, it's easy to find in Sydney, not so easy to find in other parts of the world, thanks to Italians who came here generations ago.
I love the idea of the Bertrand Russell Professor of Philosophy snapping a quick cappuccino. Look, what I'm going to do is I'm going to take a number of comments now in order. We'll try and hold them in together because I just think there's a lot of people lining up. So you go first and we'll just take it. Try and keep it kind of snappy.
Yeah. Thanks very much for the discussion, very engaging and intriguing. I just want to quickly ask about a apparent paradox that seems to be in us. So the more that we think that our existence actually matters, the more we act in a way as if it ultimately doesn't, because the more our material comforts and existential flourishing happen and seem to matter to us, the more we devastate the very ecosystem that we completely and utterly depend upon, whether through overpopulation, environmental degradation, etc. So I wanted to ask, what do you think is the reason for that paradox? Is it something that's inherent in us and just lay dormant until the technology actually arrived so we could actually start to fundamentally devastate the planet? Or is it that there's a sort of superficial narcissism that ultimately covers an uneasiness of being in the limelight?
Thanks for that. Snappy was the operative word. I know it can't always be done. I should say we're running a bit late, but we're going to use the full hour, so people might have to go after other sessions. If you wander off, that's okay. Another person here?
Hi. Someone once wrote, the question of happiness isn't the important one, but the one that follows is. So I was wondering what each of you thought was the question after this one.
So after the question, what?
Whether human existence matters.
Okay, take that. We'll take another person. We've got the paradox about pursuing what matters and destroying ourselves in the process. Happiness, what comes next?
Hi, so I just wanted to ask, we've established that human existence does matter. How much does the existence of future generations matter, in the distant future? Or should they matter at all? Climate change factors into that.
Given that they don't exist at the moment. Good.
Yeah.
One last one, perhaps.
Sure. I'd like to ask, in terms of animals and their ability to perceive what matters, would you argue that the fact that we can't that animals can't express their opinion of mattering in a sense that we can understand whether that justifies their existence or not, in terms of what you've been discussing earlier? And also, if some human groups, say, are so preoccupied with their survival and making daily life work that they're unable to consider matters such as this, whether that means that they don't have the same value as we do in terms of what you were saying earlier about non-human animals.
Okay, so let's have a crack at those. Who wants to start? Hugh.
Could I just have a try at tying together bits from two of those questions? The one about us making such a mess of the planet and the one about future generations. Because what I wanted to say in response to the one about us making such a mess of the planet in pursuit of short-term happiness, the person who said that is, of course, absolutely right. I think one of the things that's to blame is it's a sort of cognitive defect that we have to think too much about the short term and not enough about the long term. And that's exactly the problem that we need to face in thinking about future generations, of course. We're much better at dealing with immediate problems like the child running into the road than we are at thinking about whether something's going to hit us later in the century, which is going to wipe out all the children and the rest of us. And it's that same kind of blindness to the long term. And I think one of the things that we need to do is to find ways of sort of engineering ourselves around our blind spots so that we can do a better job of taking care of the long-term future. And we need to face up to the fact that we have these blind spots and just try and find
People
ways
do point out a problem about trying to infer a right or an obligation to those that do not exist but may sometime in the future. Do you see a problem in it, or you just take it as a pretty easy question to answer?
I think it's an easy question. I mean, it's a clear case of somebody calls it what is data birthism. Why should the date when someone's born, whether it's 10 years ago or 10 years from now, why should that make a difference to the...
So presumably there's an obligation to those who've lived in the past as well then?
Well, there's not much we can do
there
about
would be, if anything, that we could do now make a difference
it would
to
affect
them.
them.
But it can't, so we don't have to think about it.
I mean, it's the same sort of thing of, here we're talking about separation in time. The same thing comes up as separation in space. Should I care about people, in sub-Saharan Africa just because I don't face them, I don't know them, I don't have a personal connection with them? I mean, once we establish that human life is worth preserving, I don't see why the difference in time matters any more than the difference in space. And the other thing, this bias we have, the presentism bias, right? That we care so much more about the present than the future. It's interesting because Plato actually talks about this. Why we would, if we can get something immediately, but get something much better later on, that will take the thing immediately. And it would be interesting for, psychologists, and I think some of them have begun to try to explain this, and probably evolutionary psychologists can explain it. Life is very uncertain. I don't know if I'm going to, especially when I was a hunter-gatherer, I don't know that I'm going to live till tomorrow, grab the thing today. But, that kind of hunter-gatherer thinking is no longer suitable in the technological age that we live. But we have to think of ways around this now. We have to understand it psychologically and find ways to get around it.
Francesca, do you want to answer any of the questions? But
just
the intriguing one about what comes after happiness.
What comes after? Nothing. That's to me that's the goal. I want to just make clear that it's not like I say, yeah, I'm so super happy and my life is so great. That's not the case. But I'm just saying that when I think why life matters and why it matters that I exist and that you exist, the thing is that we can make very great things with our lives, and possibly the goal is to be happy through different ways, but that's the final goal. So I'm not saying that we should be completely stupid and happy in a sort of eternal daydream or something. But and for what involves future generation, I think it's we don't have a duty to bring into existence a particular individual, of course, but probably have an obligation to have future generations, I believe so, but also to make sure that we give them a decent planet to live in and to flourish or to be happy. So that puts more pressure on us at the moment.
I think we'll have to note that paradox that was in the first comment about how we have this will to matter, to use your phrase, and yet it could be driving us to behaviour in which we ultimately do not matter because we do not exist. I'm afraid we're out of time. I'm not going to be able to take the other questions, but Hugh and Rebecca, and are you going to be around tomorrow, Francesca? Are you here?
In the morning, yes.
In the morning. So we're all around. Hugh's on other sessions. Rebecca's doing other sessions, and she'll also...
Actually, immediately following this.
Oh, right, okay.
Yes.
And we'll also be doing book signings after that if you want to meet with her and chat with her. But as we wind up, would you please join with me in thanking our wonderful panel? Thank you. Thank you, Bea.
Thank you for your questions.